Well, thank you, everyone. Please join me in welcoming the panelists for our regulatory panel on stage now. So I think we spent a lot of time historically looking at sports betting legislation, and we were discussing outside perhaps a false sense of ease or confidence in the way things go, given how fast that market's rolled out. Frankly, for today, we're going to concentrate very little on sports betting because we're already at a stage where the vast majority of states have gone, and those that haven't gone for a reason. But the big so what and the big kind of question mark hanging over the industry is clearly more on the iGaming side in terms of the potential for those states to open going forward. The one big one I think everyone is looking at the moment for the sort of current hearings, etc., is Maryland. So I wonder if we could perhaps kick off with some thoughts on the recent hearings and where the debate sits there. Are we going to get some Maryland regulation this year? Perhaps start with John at the end there. John, okay.
Sure. I had the privilege of sitting through 2 7-hour hearings last week in Maryland on the subject and was able to testify. A lot of that oxygen in the room was eaten up by the opposition. I think what Maryland has shown is that there's fragmentation within the industry. We have 2 major casino operators in the state who are opposed to iGaming, and they've spun up a lot of opposition. But we also have 4 very strong, well-perspectived casinos that are supportive of it, and they testified very eloquently as to why iGaming would be an additive to their land-based industry. So the good thing about Maryland is that we have a very proactive chair of the committee who's the sponsor of the bill. I think if she wants to move her bill out of committee, she will move it out of committee and it will pass, and it could pass as soon as next week or early the week following. The question is, can a bill that passes the House move at all in the Senate? The Senate clearly is going to be a roadblock in Maryland. And again, we can talk more about kind of why iGaming is having difficulties in states, but clearly in Maryland, the biggest difficulty is the fact that there's a fragmented land-based industry, some who want it and some who don't.
What would we say the sort of pro-arguments are in Maryland, and perhaps are there pro-arguments that span across multiple states, or is it really every state's a very individual kind of position? Shawn, if you want to pick up on that.
Sure. I think every state's unique, and Maryland has its uniqueness to it. I do think Maryland has Morgan State now, as you know, is involved, and as I spoke about earlier, having the academic sector as part of conversations helpful. I think the hearings that we had in Maryland recently, and kind of, quite frankly, the propaganda that came from it, tells you that as a lawmaker, when you resort to that, it's hard to take it seriously. They had a flyer going around that called iGaming gambling fentanyl. I'm from a state where fentanyl has ravaged our entire state of West Virginia, so I see something like that. It's like maybe it's hard to take you seriously as a lawmaker when you resort to propaganda and the idea that cannibalization is taking place. We've had kind of competing studies on that fact. However, I will say that the evidence that we have from mature states like Pennsylvania is one that now 5 years in, they've built 4 casinos, brick and mortar, post iGaming. So on one end, when you tell a lawmaker it's going to cannibalize our industry, and on the other end, we have states that are mature states and they're still building brick and mortar casinos, it doesn't have the same weight. So that that's the interesting dynamic of Maryland, but John hit it on the head. There's so many dynamics at play, and it's every state's different. Maryland, you have everything runs through Baltimore, and getting through the Senate. Senator Watson introduced iGaming legislation. Hopefully, he can help get it across the finish line when it gets there. And we also have crossover day coming up. So when you start getting the weeds on procedural aspects, The clock is ticking. In the next couple of weeks, the bills need to move out of the House to the Senate or from the Senate into the House before the legislative process is over. And so these things are all at play, and every state is different. You have timetables, you have uniqueness, you have different lobbying side of things, but universally, we could get on the same page in a few key aspects. Revenue generation, we know that's a fact. Shrinking the black market, we know that's a fact. Like, these are things that policymakers and regulators can get on the same page on in every single state, but how you get to the finish line is certainly very different and unique in each state.
Yeah, interesting. And so you mentioned revenue generation. That seems like the most common one. James, do you think that's a factor that could change the way we see the pace of iGaming? The lottery panel earlier talked about one state a year. That's kind of broadly the pace of iGaming. Is that what we should expect?
Broadly speaking, I think that's aligned with our view at VIXIO. I do think that it's incumbent on all of us in the industry to remember that sports betting is the outlier. We think about how legal gaming has expanded across the US over the past 40 years, since land-based casinos moved from Nevada to Atlantic City. In roughly one state a year, maybe slightly less for land-based casino adoption. State lotteries didn't expand at too much of a faster pace than that, and so for sports betting to have gone from one state in 2018 to 39 states today, that is the outlier. So we are not going to see, if the pace picks up, it's not going to look like 2019 or 2021 when we had 9, 10 states legalize mobile sports betting. So that's certainly something we have to bear in mind. One thing that's very interesting looking at iGaming is you think about a state like Maryland where all politics are local, all politics of gaming expansion are local, but there are lessons you can pull out from debates in Maryland or New York or elsewhere and think about what does that mean in terms of a microcosm of a wider landscape. And Maryland is proposing pretty high tax rates. They are the legislature there is looking upon iGaming as a revenue-generating opportunity, more so than states really have done for sports. So I do think that as state budgets get tighter and federal stimulus dollars dry up, as it's already doing, we are going to see more appetite to at least consider iGaming state by state. So I think the combination of budgetary need and ironing out wrinkles state to state, and I think co-opting of local opposition. The opponents in Maryland wouldn't necessarily be the same companies, the same stakeholders as New York, as Illinois, etc. But again, thinking about how gaming has expanded and land-based casinos have expanded, there has been deals cut to get the right stakeholders on the right stage. So you have casino expansion in Illinois, you have broad gaming expansion in Pennsylvania, Maryland, a huge battle over a 6th casino license about 10 years ago, and I think combination of fiscal need and co-opting of opponents through favorable provisions and other areas is what we're going to see, and it's going to involve a lot of hand-to-hand combat, state to state, and John and co are fighting the battles in Maryland, this week, next week, and we're going to see more of that.
I'd love to come back on that point about what you can take as a template, perhaps with you with your nickel cheese hat on. But Dawn, could you perhaps talk a little bit about an example from your state's perspective about how these local opposition groups form and what kind of dynamics you can see, like a different example?
Sure. So in Louisiana, gaming has actually taken off. We have surpassed oil and gas in revenue to the state. So we have every single vertical in Louisiana except for online gaming. We have tribes, we have riverboat casinos, land-based, video poker, charitable, racetrack, lottery. So all of those different verticals, contribute $1 billion toward our state revenue. So that's always a key motivating factor, I think, for a lot of the new legislators. But I think the problem comes into it is a lot of people, if they're not getting a piece of the pie, then they don't want to make the pie bigger. They want to either, get a portion of it and be involved in it. And I think that's how sports wagering passed, because they actually tied it to our casinos, to our land base. So we have 20 licensees, and they can each have 2 platforms. So like if iGaming was going to come in, I think that looking at certain aspects of that, tying it to the casinos, might be crucial in our state. And like they said, every state's different. But just whenever you look at the opposition that's out there or the propaganda or whatever you want to call it that says, oh, it's going to cut into market share, it's going to hurt the casinos. A lot of what we hear is online gaming doesn't bring any jobs to the state. And that has been the biggest push that I've heard is it doesn't contribute to our state for jobs. It's almost like the revenue is ignored and they're just talking about jobs. So I think unless it's tied to the land-based, it might struggle a little bit in our state. And then we have, you know, the different factions that if each vertical can't have it, then they don't want somebody else to have it.
Okay. Shawn, NCLGS put together, or working to put together maybe some some template or model legislation. Can you talk a bit about that initiative, why you're doing it, and you know, where you think it might be able to lead?
So, as president of the National Council of Legislators from Gaming States, we have obviously legislators and regulators come to NCLGS. 2 events we have a year, a summer meeting and winter meeting, and we're comprised solely of legislators, elected officials throughout the country. And obviously with sports betting, as you mentioned, kind of took off, so many states are in, but iGaming is not following suit. So what if you're a lawmaker, if you're a regulator, what's the next big phase? Clearly iGaming is it. And we want to be that hub for lawmakers and regulators to come together and at our meetings learn, go back home and take something with them. So as part of that, we formed a committee that is comprised of industry insiders, regulators, lawmakers. We even have the UK involved, the Gambling Commission in the UK, to be part of this committee to produce model legislation. We're going to have several open meetings prior to our July meeting in Pittsburgh, which you're all invited to be there. I hope to see you all there. And we're going to have this open conversation to produce what we would like to see model legislation moving forward for states that can maybe spur the conversation, get things moving, and at the end, enact legislation. And that's what our duty, and it's not just going to end at iGaming, we'll get into other topics, but that is the main topic right now throughout the country. And it's something I'm looking forward to having all the stakeholders involved. At the end of the day, as you mentioned, you know, casinos want to be involved. The skin model, right? It's a type of iGaming legislation that you get across the board. You have to have everybody in the room. When we were passing it in West Virginia, we have LVL machines. Obviously, they want to be in the room. We have brick and mortar casinos. So we did a skin model, so they had a piece of it as well. So there's a way to get there. And what we're going to do functionality-wise is produce something that, while every state is unique, but there's variances and nuances, it's going to be a template to take back and say, here's how you can get it done, and we're going to help you be a catalyst for it.
So part of it's presenting a framework that's workable. Part of it's maybe revenue generation opportunity, with maybe sort of budgets tightening. But we've also discussed how it's potentially also part of the you know, co-opting opposition groups, giving them sort of skin in the game. But there are these kind of central areas of opposition, whether it's tactical in terms of an argument or whether they really are the issues. We've mentioned jobs already, and you know, that's connected to this kind of issue around cannibalization, which is still a very live debate. There was a recent EK report. John, I know you were sort of tangentially sort of involved in it. Could you perhaps talk to, you know, what that report's conclusions were, or what you see as the kind of key debates around cannibalization in terms of the way lawmakers are looking at it?
Yeah, it's actually a major debate that we're seeing unfold in every state when we talk about iGaming is this idea, does iGaming take away from either land-based casinos? That's what they're arguing in Maryland. But if we looked at Illinois, you have the VGT industry who has essentially slot machine kiosks and bars, restaurants. They're claiming that iGaming will take revenue away from them. So there is this, I would say, mythology out there, but what EK put together on behalf of Idea Growth, a trade association which I work with, was an analysis of the 6 states that have iGaming and what did it find in terms of revenue growth quarter by quarter for land-based casinos in those states that also had iGaming. And what they found was that there was actual growth in revenue. Some states it was up to 6% quarterly. Some states it was like 1 or 2% quarterly. But overall, there was growth in all of the 6 states where there was iGaming and land-based casinos. So that is, you know, a very real data point. It's not speculative. A lot of the studies that we see on the other side I will mention the Innovation Group study said there would be a 10% cannibalization rate based on their assumptions. Those are assumptions. They're not hard data. The good thing about the EK study, the Eilers-Krejcik study, is that it actually looks at the real data. What is the experience in these states and what has been the outcomes? Jobs is another huge issue. The EK study doesn't touch on that, but iGaming has been a job creator, certainly in states like New Jersey, that was kind of on the front line of this. Somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 new jobs, direct or indirect jobs, have been created in New Jersey from the iGaming industry. The advent of live dealer is really now added another layer of where jobs can be created. That's a huge point of emphasis in Maryland right now, is mandating that live dealer studios are built and maintained within the state and that they hire union employees. Those are really, I think, new powerful arguments that people are starting to say, oh, okay, actually iGaming isn't going to take jobs away, but it actually could add up to 1,000 new jobs in a state like Maryland through live dealer, through marketing partnerships, through customer service representatives, other on-the-ground people that are supporting the iGaming industry. So the industry needs to do a better job of kind of telling the job creation story. That's for sure. And really, the opponents are going to throw numbers out there. A great example is that I'm telling you that 6,000 to 8,000 jobs were created in New Jersey. Well, the opposition in Maryland last week was passing around a flyer that said 15,000 jobs were lost in New Jersey because of iGaming. No data to support it, but that's what they're saying. So how do we combat that?
Yeah. James, it's a topic we've spoken a bit about in the past, and one of the things you've raised is even within the context of overall growth, you can have winners and losers sort of below the surface. Is that perhaps something you can touch on?
Yeah, I think, I don't think there's any debate. John, you mentioned this enough times that the pie gets a lot bigger with iGaming added. So we're not talking a substitution effect of a land-based casino market just gravitating online. There are meaningful, very meaningful new tax dollars available to states, and revenue growth will come very much on top of the land-based side. So I guess, and this might be something, Shawn, you could expand on it with a lawmaker's hat on, but I guess states will look at this in two ways, right? They can look at it in aggregate and say, net, we're going to economically benefit from the regulation of iGaming. Yet there are, the impacts are different stakeholder to stakeholder. So if you are a smaller casino that is unlikely to partner with a BetMGM or a FanDuel, the question those operators are going to ask themselves is, well, what if my growth for the next 5 years is 2 or 3% instead of 5%? What does that mean for my future investment plans? So I think those sort of micro analyses of the impact of iGaming do get overshadowed by the 15,000 jobs being lost in a mass shutdown event, which is just not feasible. So I do think, as I said, there is the cannibalization argument is something we're seeing in real time in Maryland and here in New York. It's not something that the industry can run away from. It has to sort of consider local impacts and look at creative solutions of thinking about that. Hold harmless provisions in bills are things we've seen with casino expansion. We'll probably see more of that with iGaming. So,
do you want to jump in?
I was just going to say, to piggyback on both John and James, and even what Shawn said earlier, is I think education is the most important piece. A lot of stories get spun out there, and legislators don't always have the time to listen to everybody and to really figure out what the facts are. So sometimes the first person that gets in their ear, if they start hearing buzzwords or it's going to mess with jobs, it's very easy for them to say, I'm not dealing with that. I have other things that I need to deal with. Gaming is not important. It's too controversial. It could be damaging. And it's a very easy industry to just kind of set aside for those reasons because of the alleged ills that are out there. So I think the relationships that industry builds with the regulators and the legislators is huge for them to be able to come and say, I'm hearing this, is this accurate? Do you actually have data points that can contradict this, memo that I received from somebody that said I shouldn't vote this way? And I think that that's crucial for any gaming regulation.
Well, on the messaging side for the industry, as a lawmaker, every single lawmaker will agree, raise new revenue, not taxes. And if the industry was marching into every state capital in lockstep with that message, I feel like we'd be further ahead than we are right now. Because regardless of what's going on, every state wants to raise new revenue. If you walk up to somebody on the street, if you're talking to anybody, eventually when that revenue starts declining, which post-COVID, it's going to start. The COVID money kept cash flow going in states. That's now not the case, and they're going to have to come up with new revenue. And if they're not coming up with new revenue through iGaming, they're coming into your pocket. And that that should resonate with every single legislator. But I feel like the industry has not marched in step together with that messaging. And as far as you brought up earlier, sports betting and iGaming, I always use the golf analogy. It's drive for show, putt for dough. When it comes to sports betting and iGaming, it's sports betting for show, iGaming for dough. I mean, we're talking about 3+ months in most states that you need to have sports betting operating to equate to 1 month of iGaming. When you put those real numbers out in front of a policymaker or a regulator, I mean, that makes a real difference in the decision-making process.
Is the industry losing the argument, or if I put it the other way, could the industry turn a sort of negative into a positive? When I think of Illinois appears to be going the exact opposite route in terms of raising taxes on sports betting rather than pursuing an iGaming opportunity ahead of it. So is the industry just not getting its message right? Is that what you're driving at, or is there an opportunity there to, is that going to potentially show that states do need revenue and give you an opportunity to get in front of these?
I feel like there was complacency, as was brought up earlier. Sports betting, different animal. The public understood it. They were supportive. They were out in front. Politicians react to the public, not the other way around. The public's not there yet on iGaming, in large part because there's been no real messaging. The industry hasn't gone out to the public and garnered their support. They've gone straight to the legislature, and it's not very receptive. So we have to work on that in order to move things forward, because right now, comparing it to sports betting is just not the same. And we see that, obviously. And we saw the slow rollout of brick and mortars or LVLs, like that took time. This is also taking time, but I feel like the complacency based upon the rush in a post-PASPA world of sports betting really set in with the industry, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I think you can really use that, though. Like in our state, we were all told sports betting's just an amenity. It's to get people in the casino. It's going to be maybe 3-4%. But when we see $80 million in tax revenue generated in a year, and now we see our legislative session starts on Monday. We actually have pre-filed bills right now where people are trying to say, hey, 2% of that needs to come over to this special interest. So people are loving the amount that sports wagering is bringing in. And if you say iGaming is going to, fivefold, tenfold, whatever the stats say, I think that that's a huge in.
It's real money, real change.
Right.
I mean, the revenue component, I mean, that ultimately is going to drive it politically, but the industry needs to be able to answer some of the tough political questions that we're getting. We got them at the hearing last week. A lot of people, we talk a lot about self-exclusion and responsible gaming measures that the industry has, but when pressed on, well, what are you doing proactively to intervene with a gambler who's suffered or demonstrated a problematic behavior? What have you done? It was difficult for some of the companies to actually respond and provide direct evidences. Like, this is how many interventions we've done over the last 6 months. And so that kind of data, I think, would be really valuable, because it really undermines this narrative that iGaming is going to create an epidemic of problem gambling. It really hasn't been the situation in any jurisdiction, but I think lawmakers will feel much more comfortable if the industry is proactive to say, not only is it not going to happen, here are all the steps we're taking to make sure we're identifying the problems before they start and intervening to help gamblers.
That's not to plug our program, but we started the Problem Gambling Resource Services program, where we actually our office goes out and educates attorneys and judges on gambling addiction. And Louisiana is its own amazing thing. It actually provides free residential and outpatient treatment. Can you guys hear me? Free residential and outpatient treatment for anybody with a compulsive gambling problem, and provides therapy services for any of their family members, which is huge. So whenever I hear a lot of operators, that don't want to put information about that, like how hard is it to put on your website that we offer free gambling treatment in Louisiana, and for out-of-state residents, it's only $5,000, which is like a tenth of the cost of anywhere else. But I think that operators need to use more of a relationship and be open to just sort of addressing that issue. Like, don't let it be something that you don't discuss or you say is not a problem. Really try to figure out, and I get that it's all a business model. You guys have to figure out what works for you, but really try to make an effort to not, add to the problem.
Well, and to John's point, the industry response right out the gate to a question about what are you doing is step one, we're identifying them, because in a black market, we're not. And that's something that gets lost in the conversation. Is step one, we're identifying potential problem gamers. You're not in the black market, and that's where the protections come into place in a legalized, regulated market. So if you truly believe in consumer protection, and you truly believe in identifying problem gambling, you need to have a regulated market, one that regulates the industry as well. I mean, I'm honored to be part of Playn'GO. They do regulate themselves in a way that many other companies do not. But the idea that the industry is going to police itself is a false narrative as well. And that's something that I think gets lost in the conversation. We need to have a well-regulated market. One, to identify problem gambling. And that's step one. And two, make sure that the operators operate in an up-and-up manner as well. And that's, everybody wins that situation. When it's people-driven, people first, you get results for everyone. And it's going to be profitable for everybody across the board. And it's going to be sustainable for years to come. And when you start enacting legislation, there's like this gold rush, right? That's kind of the theory that comes into play. But for a sustainable model, we got to start extrapolating this out 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. What does it look like? And that's where legalization, step one, transparency, and a framework comes into play at the very beginning. And until we do that, the black market's going to thrive. Yeah. And that's, unfortunately, something that's happening in many states, and we need to start moving forward.
So we've covered Maryland, and maybe, I think we'll call it. We've covered it. We spoke briefly on Illinois. It'd be remiss not to talk about New York. I think Senator Adabo's here tomorrow. Sort of lightning round down the panel. So I don't know, through body language. James, you've already started sighing.
Yeah, not this year for New York, I think. Many of the dynamics in play in Maryland are in play in New York. I think particularly union group opposition. Big challenge in New York. And alongside that, certainly the overhang of the licensing of 3 new downstate casinos sort of around the part of town where we are. So I think there are 2 very good reasons not to move forward, and but I think part of this process is going to be removing the reasons not to do something. Yep. And New York has a couple of ones. I wouldn't feel optimistic about 2024 in New York, but what I would say is that, all things being equal, New York will legalize iGaming one day, right? If we're sat here 10 years from now, 15 years from now, iGaming will be legal in New York, whether it's 2, 3, 5, except down there. I do think the New York market will be so large, and it will be a game changer for the whole US landscape, because I think you see such innovation and investment into a New York iGaming market that it will be a sort of sliding doors moment for the US as a whole.
His point is great about the downstate casinos. I've always been very skeptical that iGaming could get out in front of some resolution on that. And unfortunately, I would say the Gaming Commission has moved rather slowly on making those decisions. So we may be holding our breath for beyond 2025. Senator Adabo is an amazing champion and always optimistic, but I think he would acknowledge that 2024 is not going to be the year for iGaming in New York. But what he wants to use this year for and going into next year is like, let's talk about it. Let's find out where the opposition is, what are the issues, how do we address them, how do we bring everybody into the tent.
Dawn, you mentioned you've got a lot of products in your state. Could you get the full house at some point, do you think? iGaming is a realistic possibility this year, next year, in the next few years?
I don't know when. I think it's definitely possible. I think with sports wagering and fantasy, we didn't have any expansion of gaming for 30 years. And then all of a sudden, within a couple years, we just blew up. And I think that COVID, it was sort of the perfect timing for everything to happen that way. This session that starts Monday is not a fiscal session. So you couldn't have it passed. But what they could do is we actually have to have a vote because it's a new form of gaming. And ours are parish by parish. So like 57 of our 64 parishes have sports wagering, our 58, and then 47 have fantasy. So our entire state doesn't have to pass it. Each parish, we could only have a couple. But I think that if they let the people vote, that's the easiest way in. Or they could do like they did sports wagering and put out the regulation and then add the tax piece next year during a fiscal session. So we were told that there probably wouldn't be a lot of gaming bills this year, but we've already had dozens pre-filed. And filing date doesn't end until April 2nd, so kind of just waiting to see what's going to happen.
Well, I think it'll be interesting between Louisiana, as you say, and if it gets to a vote, Maryland, if it gets to a referendum, how that public support or not may then cascade, because if the public says it is popular, then great, and maybe we get even more negative on the prospects of iGaming if it doesn't, right?
That's a possible pathway in Maryland as well, is to strip out all of the enabling regulatory language from the bill and just pass a measure that goes to the voters in November that says, do you support it? And then the legislature comes back in 2025 and puts meat on the bone. Mm-hmm. That's exactly how sports betting got done in Maryland back in 2020. That is a fallback position, I think, in Maryland should the bill as in the current form run into a roadblock.
I think just to piggyback on that, John, I think that would come with some risk in Maryland to go to the population with a just a straight up iGaming yay or nay. We'll figure out the details next year. Perfectly logical why lawmakers would want to take that approach. They can have a decision made for them as to whether they want to expend the political capital or not, working through the details. But again, going back to the idea of placating opponents, the way that opponents will be placated is through the details of the legislation. Sure. So if you leave some of these open questions unresolved in Maryland, you risk having opposition. Casino owners that may or may not operate a casino near BWI Airport, staying in the opponent camp rather than maybe being pacified through the details. That's what happened in 2012, again, in Maryland with the 6th casino at National Harbor and table games. The details were done before they went to the votes, and even then it was an absolute frenzy of a referendum, which out-of-state casinos opposing and those within trying to fight it. So I do think Maryland is going to be a fascinating case study, actually, if they go that way. It will tell us a lot about how the population at large views the market and whether iGaming can withstand, pass a referendum with opponents on the battlefield. That's going to be fascinating.
There's one last bit I want to address in the time we've got remaining, and that's, very clearly from everything we've discussed and everything we've seen, the pace of iGaming legislation has been slow or normal compared to sports being fast, whichever way you want to sort of view it. But I think unquestionably one of the things that's getting more and more attention is to what extent the slow pace of iGaming rollout is creating oxygen and space for other products to thrive. I mean, I think perhaps lottery courier, e-lottery is not exactly the same on that last panel, but it's arguably got some similarities. Certainly sweepstakes is one that gets talked about more and more right now. So how should we think about, I guess, first of all, the sort of legal framework or unregulated framework that sweepstakes currently exists in? Perhaps if you could start, John.
Sure. It's interesting because not only, there is going to be clearly illegal online gambling that's happening and is only going to grow in the absence of regulation. In fact, I don't know if any of you guys, I listen to a lot of sports podcasts, and you always hear ads for Bovada's or MyBookie or whomever else, and now every sports I live in the DC area, so we have sports betting all around us, but we don't have iGaming. And every one of those ads now not just talks about sports betting, but they talk about their online casino and online casino gambling that people can do. So they know that there's a void. So the black market, those companies that have been very prominent in sports betting are shifting resources to iGaming because they know they can do it. And then I think there's this kind of now question of sweepstakes, which is, if you look at it, it looks like an iGaming game. They operate under a different set of rules, and I'm not here to opine on what the legality of sweepstakes is, but clearly there are companies that are filling the void where a clear regulated market, when a clear regulated market is not established. So I think we're going to see that grow, and it'll be interesting to see will companies in the regulated space look at these less regulated games and say, well, maybe we can start offering those. If there's no consequences for them, why should there be consequences for us if we also get into that game?
Any thoughts about how it might evolve from a regular position? I mean, Michigan, for instance, did look at this space. Is that an exception, or is that a shot across the bow? How should we look at Michigan, do we think?
I think it's hard to say at this stage. The thing with Michigan is I don't think it's a coincidence. We've seen the first state crack down at actions against the prominent online sweepstake operators having, that it's not a coincidence that's occurred in one of the big three iGaming markets, right? There is a incumbent tax-paying licensed online casino market to protect. And we don't have that in, other than a half dozen other states. So would we see a Pennsylvania or a New Jersey or a Connecticut, for example, take similar actions? I don't know. We haven't really quite had the domino impact of that yet. And then in states that don't have online casino gaming, clearly there are sweepstakes online casinos filling a void there, not rubbing up against a regulated direct like-for-like competition, if you would see it that way. But perhaps might be something that Dawn can opine on. Regulators in those states do still have a mandate to, I think a mission really to police their markets. So I would not be surprised if this is Michigan has raised questions that other states are at least going to take a look at.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially as other states start to look at things, the regulators in each state, they start to look at it as well. It's easy if one state starts to say, hey, this is not okay here. Of course, all the other ones are going to look at it and say, is this happening in my state? And I think that that's the big thing, just like with the pick'em, same with sweepstakes. You start bringing your product into light, and it could be that you were only getting by with it because the regulators didn't know you were doing it. And now they know that you're doing it. Like in Louisiana, chance and skill doesn't matter. We don't have social gaming. If it's not regulated, it is illegal gambling. Nobody can profit off of two people making a bet or risking something of value to get something in return. So, Shawn and I can have a friendly game of poker at my house. Nobody's benefiting anything. But if you go into a bar and you play, they sold an extra beer because we were there an extra hour. That is an illegal gambling operation. So there's a strong argument on the sweepstakes, not making a legal opinion, just saying, that's a company that is profiting off of somebody risking something of value to get something, even if there is a free contest. But a lot of it is just the more you put it out there and you're putting it out into the light, it's going to get some scrutiny.
She said if I beat her at poker, she'll make sure iGaming gets passed in Louisiana.
That did not happen, for the record.
Excellent. I think that's actually a great point to leave it. Thank you very much, and please join us in thanking the panel for their contribution.